Okay, fabulous. Thank you for that, Karina. So let's begin. So why communication fails in international teams? This is our second webinar. The last time we looked at some kind of foundational things around culture, showing up at work, and kind of informing how we operate. So and that's all based around these Myers scales, these eight areas of work. So today we're looking at communication. There are seven others. And we're going to look at how we can communicate better in our teams, and also those differences, and look at ways that we can fix those, and how we can work better together. So here's a scenario. So an email creates a problem. I don't know if any of you have had this issue where an email just doesn't quite land well. So a manager in Amsterdam writes to her team in Tokyo and says, "This deck isn't convincing enough. We need to redo it by Friday." For you, maybe this seems totally normal. This is a perfectly great way to express yourself and to say what the problem is. However, for that person in Tokyo, this may not land well. This may seem quite blunt, quite rude, even. And yeah, so that may land very differently. So it's the same words, but in different worlds, they have different meanings. And this is what we're looking at today, this concept of different ways of communicating in our teams. Um, just to link that a little bit to what we looked at in our first seminar, I just want to reiterate this concept of the iceberg and culture, in that so much of so much of the behavior that we see at work, and specifically in how people communicate, um, is informed by all of these things below the surface that we don't always see. We're very much drawn to the above the surface, which is visible, but underneath that are all of our values, beliefs, and our attitudes, the way that we communicate. And this is all has all been informed by the culture that we've grown up in. So, our dominant culture is that culture that we grew up in as a child, and then we obviously went off to work, and also we're that beneath the surface is also informed to our experience and our professional experience. So there's so much that goes on underneath the surface that we don't see, and often we only react to and we only explain things based on what we can see above the surface. So let's tell you who we are. So, Karina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Karina Indytska. I work across cultures and in the area of communications, where I take different roles. I'm an MC, public speaking coach, language teacher, and cross-cultural consultant. And together with Brandon, we have started this webinar series to show you how important culture actually is and how to make it visible and make the most out of it. Today I will be here moderating, and next time you will hear more from me again. So we will take turns. And today also I will be here to read your comments. If you have any questions, I'm there for you and I will answer to you in the chat.
Excellent, fabulous. And just so that you know who I am, I'm going to be leading our webinar today. My name is Brendan. I'm a cross-cultural consultant. I live in Barcelona. I'm originally from the United Kingdom, and I kind of have a lot of work experience in West Africa and in other parts of the world. And I work with teams, helping them to work better together when those teams are from different cultures, either based in the same office or dispersed around the world, teams working virtually together. So that's what I kind of get up to on my day to day. And so uh, let's let's move on. Let's have a little bit of a look in more detail about this topic of high and low context communication, what that means, and how it shows up at work. Typically, when people say things that we don't like, we usually blame them by saying they're being rude, they're not engaged, their English isn't strong enough, they don't get it. And these are all quite reasonable responses when we do feel that somebody is being rude or when we do feel that somebody isn't engaged in a meeting in the way that we think that they should be. And these are our perceptions, and how we see other people and what our expectations are, how I want to receive communication, how I expect you to behave. But obviously, when we're working from different cultures and different perspectives, then people operate in different ways. And so it's not just about the behavior, and that's the thing that we meet every day. That's the meeting point. But being able to see beyond that behavior and to being able to think, well, hang on, what is driving this behavior? Is this cultural? And often this question doesn't get asked. Is this cultural? It's not character, it's more culture. So we're going to look at a few ways that this shows up. Two people can use the same words, but they can mean quite different things to people. So yes may not mean yes, and maybe may mean yes, maybe, or no, maybe. And interesting, well, can mean a few different things. I don't know, Karina, do you have something you can input here?
Yeah, actually, I'm curious first, our audience, if you hear the word, if you read the word interesting, just reading it, does it have a positive or a negative connotation for you? You can write in the chat a thumbs up or a thumbs down, thumbs up for positive, thumbs
Hmm.
down for negative. I'm curious about that.
Hmm.
Negative, definitely, I read.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
She's
Interesting.
sure, Sasha's sure. Negative, definitely. For me personally, I use interesting as something neutral. A super
Mm.
easy example outside of work when I try new flavor of food and I cannot define whether I like it or not. It's just a new flavor to me. I use the word interesting. But interesting can also mean like, oh, yeah, the webinar, it was super interesting. And I hope if somebody says that about our webinar, they mean it in a positive way.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. That's
That's very
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you're absolutely right. This can be perceived in at least three different ways. Interesting as in, wow, that's something I want to learn more about. I want to spend some time because that's an interest to me. Interesting as in this kind of neutral. Neutral doesn't really mean anything. It's just a word that we throw out there to show that we've heard them, yes, I've heard that. And then interesting in that negative way, wow, that's interesting. And notice that tone changes everything. Wow, interesting. That's interesting. Very different ways and meanings. And this word maybe is a little bit easier for us to get our head around, but depending on the cultures that we're from, yes may not mean yes. It may just mean that I've heard you, I acknowledge that you've put something out into the room. Maybe may mean no, and it may mean yes, and it may mean something completely different. And we need to be aware of this when we're having conversations with people from different cultures, because what we're hearing may not be what that individual is actually saying. So let's move on. 86% of employees and executives cite lack of effective communication and collaboration as the main cause of workplace failures. And a significant proportion of that will be due to culture. It may be due to a lack of training, it may be due to inexperience, but a significant amount of that is due to culture alone. So why can't we see it? Why are we not seeing these things? And that's because we don't often understand our perspective. We don't often understand how we operate in real life, real time interactions with other people. Um, we don't think about it. We also assume that I'm working in a team with people that are from different cultures. I'm going to make a bit more effort here to make sure that they know I understand them and they understand me, which is great that we're we're making much more of an effort, but it still doesn't mean that two people really understand each other and that we can offend each other quite easily with the words that we're using if we don't understand how the person receives them. And that offense, I call this cultural friction. This is not big things that happen, at a moment in an afternoon on Wednesday where somebody says something, right, that's it. I'm gonna have a chat with them about this. These are little things that build up over weeks, months, even years, that build up until the point where they become really difficult and working relationships can fall apart. People can go into that quiet quitting, which is, I'm basically just giving you the minimal that you're going to get from me. And eventually those people, we lose those people. They don't stay. So good intentions is not enough. We need knowledge, skills, and tools to be able to navigate the different communication styles. Um, and yeah, and a lot is unspoken. A lot of this is in tone, in pacing, much more for higher context. We're going to look at that now in a bit more detail. So, how can we make culture visible? How can we look at this? So we're going to talk about this communicating, and we're going to be focusing on low context communicators and high context communicators. And I'll show you in a moment. We're also going to, over the next few months, be discussing other elements of the Erin Meyer's scales, the evaluating, persuading. Those are for future webinars. Today, we're going to focus on this communicating aspect. So here's our scale. Now, I just want to reiterate something from our first webinar is that this is a scale. It's not that one person is low context, and it's not that another person is high context. There are a lot of things in the middle. So some people can be higher context than other people, but they're still kind of on this high context side of the scale. And some people can be much more lower context than others. So I'm just going to give this kind of an explanation. Low context communication, people who sit on that side of the scale, they tend to be very precise with their communication, very simple, very explicit. All of the meaning of what they are saying is only in the words. Now, I say only, that's at that one extreme end of that pole. As you move along that scale, those higher context aspects start getting involved as well. And as we get to the center of that scale, we kind of have this beautiful balance of being able to communicate in low context and high context to not only express ourselves well, but also to understand others well. These people who sit in the middle of the scale are very important in teams where we have people operating at two extremes. And then as we move along that scale towards our higher context, then we move into this that good communication is layered and we read between the lines or we read the air are the common expressions that we use. So yeah, if you don't understand, it's the listener's fault. It's because they don't understand you. These are two completely different ways of expressing ourselves and communicating. And just to give you an idea, oh, I thought I had some countries placed. That's coming. Just to give you an idea, at this kind of low context, at the extreme there, you would have a culture such as the USA. And at the other extreme end, in the high context culture, you would have a culture such as Japan and these Eastern Asian cultures. So,
Just a tip from my side. I
yeah.
always found the terms low context and high context confusing because they're not
Hmm.
very obvious to me. But you can remember it in a way that low context are people that share little context together. So they need to express themselves explicitly. And that also many times derives from the history of the country. Like Brendan said, USA is a quite new country in the history of the world with many different cultures and migrants who contributed to it. So a lot of explicit communication was important in order to understand each other. And cultures that have very long traditions and they keep on living those, they have a very high shared context. So they need less words because they know what's implicitly meant when maybe just referencing one word or one concept.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic and absolutely right, Karina. Yeah, the history of these cultures really explains a lot about how they've evolved in terms of expressing themselves. So let's just have a little look. Low context. What exactly is that? How does that look? And I've put some example cultures. Remember, we're talking about tendencies. These are not labels that we say that all American people are like this, all Canadian people are like this. That's not true. Experience, context, our professional lives all go into that mix. But typically, the tendency for low context communication tends to be with kind of North American, Australia, German, Netherlands, Scandinavia. So Northern Europe, kind of these kind of New World countries. Tend to be much more explicit in their communication. So you can see what it, let me be clear. Deadline is this time, this time, this time. I agree with this. This is why. If anything's unclear, you ask me. Just to recap, and recapping is very common in higher context cultures. Everything gets said two, three, four times just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody understands, everybody's there. So repetition, we call this a service. It's like I'm helping you by repeating. Now, if you're on that higher context end of the scale, you might feel this as being, and I'll one of my students said this to me yesterday, is if you keep repeating things to me, I'm just going to think that you think I'm stupid. And that's a very common is a very common experience that people have in this higher context register, is that they just think, why do you keep repeating this stuff? Why are you sending me emails after emails of things we've already talked about and already agreed? And this can create tension, frustration. So yeah, we can perceive lower context cultures as being a little bit cold, actually, because they just go straight to the points. Boom, boom, boom. If we move on to higher context cultures, and those kind of cultures are, well, on this side of the scale, are cultures such as Japan and Korea and China and Latin America, these kind of cultures where you need to have the skills of reading the air, reading between the lines. Um, and yeah, so that's an interesting proposal. That there's our word, interesting. It might be a bit difficult. Yeah, we'll do our best. Yeah. Now, these often are received by lower context cultures as very ambiguous. Like, they're either very ambiguous, I have no idea what that person is saying, or they get interpreted as in, yes, we're in a great place here, everything's good. So it might be a bit difficult for a lower context person, could well mean, okay, it's hard, I know it's hard, it's you've got a tight deadline, but you're going to do it. And actually, what a higher context person may be saying is that there's no way that we can do that. It's never going to happen. But because it's very difficult in some cultures to say no categorically, they don't say that. And there's a complete misinterpretation of what is being said. So yeah, those meanings live between the lines, and yeah, so these are our two extremes. So the question is, Karina.
The question is, where would you position yourself? And now this question is not so easy to answer, especially because we can look at it from two perspectives. One is, how do I, as an individual, me as Karina, would I say I'm rather low context or high context communicator, not thinking about what's happening outside or like surrounding me? But another way of approaching this is, where does my culture stand? So to answer, like to focus this exercise now, just think about yourself as an individual, not thinking where you were born, raised, etc. Just you as an individual. And you can think about it for a moment and then write your answer in the comments. And meanwhile, I would like to throw this question back at you, Brandon. Where do you position yourself?
Mhm. Okay. Where do I position myself? And I'm going to add a big caveat. It depends. And it depends on my environment. Because I've spent a lot of time working in different environments, I find that I change. I change depending on the environment, the context that I'm in. So if I'm in a project management meeting in the UK with other team members and we need to plan a project, I'm gonna be much more towards this low context. Maybe that second dot on the scale is probably where I'm gonna be.
Mm.
However, if I'm meeting with friends and we're just hanging out together and we're just enjoying stuff, I'm actually probably going to be more where the fourth dot is. I'm going to default back to my very natural position, which is a bit more towards the higher context, but still very much on that low context side of the scale. That's
Hmm.
probably where I would position myself. Probably not very helpful,
Interesting.
but there you go.
Interesting, positively meant.
Hmm. Yeah, excellent.
Okay. We also have a few comments here. So we have someone saying third point from the left and also lower context. I think I'm really comfortable with people repeating facts. It feels safer. So we
Mm,
have two comments on the lower context. And I would also say I'm on the lower context end, especially in the professional context, because
mm.
since also I know that there's so many ways to interpret messages, it feels clear to repeat it. But now also, and I think this is a skill we've developed because we've worked with cultures, it's also explaining people why I'm so direct to already make sure they don't feel like I don't think they're not capable of doing something, but this is just the communication style thing.
I have a question for you, Karina. Do
Yeah.
you apologize for your directness?
No, I don't.
Okay,
Um,
excellent.
I explain people that it comes with a good intent, because I value honesty, directness, so we can move forward and understand each other better, and that it's not an attack, but
Hmm.
yeah, comes with positive intent. But I also ask if this is okay, and usually people reply that it's okay for them. And I ask them,
Yeah.
I tell them if they feel open and comfortable, they can also share their direct opinions and thoughts, which I find also people who are more on the high context spectrum, then they tend to open up a little bit more, which I appreciate a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's really good. And that's acknowledging, isn't it? It's acknowledging cultures in the room with us. It's there.
Mhm.
So let's talk about that before we get into, into the details. Here is where countries typically sit on this scale. Remember, these are tendencies. They don't take into account your own personal story, but they're tendencies, and they tend to be reasonably accurate. I mean, there's years and years and years of research that has gone into creating these things. So you can see the UK. That's actually probably where I would put myself when I'm with my friends. But I definitely move much more towards Canada when I'm in a business professional meeting, especially in that project management environment. So you can see that the two extremes, again, USA and Japan, are those two extreme cultures. So communication really needs to be thought about there. So yeah, we can see that there's kind of these new world, these Northern European on that lower context side of things. And then as we move across, we get into kind of Latin, these kind of Latin cultures, and then our subcontinent and India, and then over to East Asia, operating much more on this higher context side. One of the key things is that most of the world cultures operate in a higher context, on the higher context side of this, which is very interesting if you are from then some of the economies in the world that are the larger economies that are trying to do business with countries that are in this higher context. So I'm thinking about Northern European Union, the North American, very strong economies working in emerging markets, in cultures that are higher context, the communication is different. And so a lot of these people that are coming from lower context cultures, working in higher context cultures, they need training. They need to understand how to communicate well in those markets. And again, we're talking about distance. So you can see just the distance between the UK and Germany. that's a smaller distance. The chance of friction is relatively low, but there is chance. There's a gap there. However, the chance of friction between the UK and Australia, that's a much bigger gap. And so the chance of friction there is also a reality. But then if we go to other ends of the scale, that's the chances and of friction are quite high. And to be able to reduce that is what we're looking at. And we're going to look at, as we get to the end, we'll look at some things that we can do to try and reduce that friction between these different cultures. So let's look at some examples. Emails. 94% of professionals, global professionals, communicate their preferred choice of communication is email. However, that's great if you're low context. Low context, 3 lines, boom, boom, boom. This is what I mean. Please send the report by Tuesday. Clear, concise, no messing around. I don't need to know what you did at the weekend, and I'm not going to tell you what I did. I just need this, 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 and this. That's it. However, if you're sending that to somebody from a much higher context culture, they're going to receive that as being quite blunt, maybe rude. There's no salutations, no sign off, nothing else going on in there. And if you're from a higher context culture and your default is sending emails, you naturally want to include context in your emails. So your emails have a lot more words because you naturally want to include these contexts. You want to create this human connection. You want to build that relationship and trust. And these are things we'll talk about in future webinars. But yeah, your communication is very different. Both of these messages mean the same thing. The higher context, this is urgent. We need to prioritize this, but a lower context person may not get that message because it doesn't say, I need this by Tuesday, 5 p.m. Central European time. And so that may get totally missed by a lower context person. And this constant, if you're working together and these emails are constantly going backwards and forwards, the chance of miscommunication, misunderstanding, frustration, tension, it's just going up and up and up and up. And so this is one key. I don't know, Karina, do you have something you would like to add onto this?
Actually, I have an example for a huge misunderstanding on that level, which did not happen to me, but I run these events where we speak about failure to break the taboo around it and to learn from our mistakes. And there was a story on failure from a German business professional, a very human-centered person, focused on sustainability, very sensitive and aware of the people around her. And with her company, she had very important partnership in the Philippines that was going super well. They built trust and they were going forward in the next year to work in the next years together. What happened is there was an internal challenge that both had to overcome together. And what she did, the German business professional, is sending an email outlining the problem and the next steps to take to move forward. So in a rather pragmatic way, because this is a way to deal with its problem in a solution-oriented way. From there, the email communication became quite dry. She started to receive less responses, and at some point, she wondered what was going on. Um, and until even the partner said, "Well, we'll see if we continue the partnership," and she was very, very surprised about this response. Luckily, she had a chance to speak to them in person at some point, and she found out that they were actually very offended about this email. They felt like she did not trust them, that she wasn't interested in this business partnership, and through this email that had such a good intent to move forward together, this whole partnership almost failed. So I
Right.
think this shows the impact of messages and how they can be misinterpreted. And we see also Germany and Philippines on other extremes of this scale.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, it can have a quite drastic impact on our whole business.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good example. Yeah, absolutely. Really good. So let's move on to meetings. Who's actually agreeing that the kind of decision moment? If you're low context, you're going to no, I don't agree. I'm not. Here's my concern. That's going to show up in a meeting, and that's going to take some people. Whoa, okay. And there's other things operating there. If you're kind of in that middle ground, remember that kind of UK culture is kind of towards the middle. I mostly agree. I have a question. It's very tentative. It's softened. We know that British culture tends to soften their messages a little bit, which can then just go straight over the head of lower context cultures. And then if you're a higher context and you've got a problem, you may not you may not verbalize that in a meeting. You may actually use silence as your way of showing that you have a problem. However, lower context and even mid-range context people may receive that silence as agreement, whereas actually you mean disagreement. Karina, I don't know if you have something to add in on this.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting if we look at teamwork and multicultural teams, because usually there we have maybe even each person from the team coming from a different culture, being shaped by different cultures. So a team culture is also one cultural context, right? So what
Mhm.
happens many times is that this team develops their own culture based on the different national cultures that are there. And in my experience, what has worked well is if the team has developed a rather low context culture, because then they're more explicit and they can also include those who are on the high context level, but they need to be very clear with them why they're communicating in this very polite, softening way. If the team culture is a rather high context culture and messages need to be read in between the lines, it's very difficult to bring the low context communicators on board. So also teams need to sit together and either do it internally or a training and get on this meta level to shape their culture actively, not just let it happen and flow, and which is also part of it, but it's not enough to create effective teamwork.
Yeah, that's absolutely fabulous, and that actually leads very well into, one of the ways that we help teams to move past the friction is to create what we call a third culture. There's lots of researchers that have written about third culture, Casimir, and this is very intentionally designing your communication within your team. That's thinking about what channels do we use to communicate? Is email the only channel? Are we using instant messaging? Do we do video calls? And then understanding, well, actually, when do we do a video call? What is it? Is that just for a catch up, or is that when we need to make agreements? When do we use video calls? When do we use instant messaging? When do we use emails? Knowing when to use a particular channel, and the other follow on from that is then knowing when to expect a response. So if you send an email, I always work on the idea that emails should be responded to within 24 hours. Whether you have the answer or not, you acknowledge the receipt, the email gets sent. I haven't got the answer today, but I will give you that answer by Tuesday at 6 o'clock CET. This is a great, because then the other person at the other end knows that it's coming. If you're higher context, you probably don't need that email. But by sending that email, there is clarity. And then also instant messaging. If we're available, what's the response time? I typically say that if you send me an instant message and I'm not in a meeting, I'm going to respond to that instant message within an hour, same day. So these are kind of things that we can put into place to create this third culture. It's not your culture is the one we're going to use, or your culture is the one we're going to use. We're going to create something new. It's really, really good. Really, really key, that is, Karina. Negotiations as well, the framing. Here's our offer. What's yours? Very low context. This is what we are going to offer you. I want to know what you're offering us. Here's the price. Here's the deadlines. This is what you're going to do. All written out in a nice, big, long contract that lawyers have looked at, and it's all good. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to agree it. And then we're going to get into a meeting, and we're going to work on that together. That's super low context. high context, and I put it, we should go to dinner first, is actually, do you know what? I'm not going to do business with you until I trust you. And again, trust is something we're going to look at in the future. But until we've built a relationship with each other, I don't know if I can trust you. And I actually don't know how you communicate. I don't know anything. And I want to put all of those things in place first before we start agreeing on details in a meeting. And so how we communicate that differs. So, and then you've also got these people in the middle, and I've mentioned this before. Cultures that sit in the middle of these scales can be used as bridges. They can be used as interpreters. I don't understand what this person was saying, and those people in the middle can be translators. They can relay that message in a way that maybe a higher context person is going to be able to understand. So we're creating these bridges between two extreme cultures and using people in the middle to as bridges to hopefully remove some of that misunderstanding. So those are some of those things. Remember, we've talked about this. This is all relative. These stereotypes of, people are blunt or people are rude or people don't say what they mean. These are just stereotypes. It really depends on where you are standing. So USA is quite high context. Sorry, USA is quite low context, but so is the UK. But to an American, I may feel quite high context because I'm using a lot of words and I'm not being very clear and very explicit. But to a Japanese culture, to that kind of culture, the tendency is that I'm going to be very, very low context. So it all depends on where you're standing, where you are on those scales. Okay, excellent. Let me find out what's there we go. Okay, so how do we reduce friction? How do we do this? Hidden friction, daily misunderstandings, decisions are being revisited over and over again. We're not building trust in our teams. There's this quiet attrition, it's just frustration, it's just difficult, it's just hard. I don't want to speak to this person because it's just difficult. I'd rather avoid. Avoidance is a big part of what happens as well. And so how do we do this? How do we manage this and bring this to a strategic advantage so that things do stick and we do get decisions that happen? My first point here is to bring that into the open. We need to be talking about culture in teams. If we're not talking about it, if we're not learning about it, then it's going to be a problem. It's always going to be a problem for us. So we need to bring this out and we need to talk about it. Workshops, training, HR needs to be ensuring that there's regular revisiting this, especially if you've got a multicultural team, people from lots of different cultures working in the same office. Or if they're dispersed, you've got teams from different cultures and they're communicating virtually, adds an extra layer to difficulty. That needs to be done. We need to talk about it, make it clear, bring it out into the open, and start talking about our norms, how we operate. Once we've done that, then we can start to say, how do we communicate? Typically, as just picking up on what Karina said, typically for professionals working in teams, the default is to move communication to the lower context side of things because that removes the possibility of doubt. Remember, I said that higher context people may find that quite insulting. Repetition, everything just being repeated, emails with things that I already know. But it's the best way. And so when we understand, it helps us to accept much more. And then building bilingual communicators, changing the way we're talking. So lower context people softening their openings, reading silence, learning how to listen is a skill that often needs training. To learn how to listen well, building those relationships. They're not super natural for super low context, but they're important. And then for those higher context people to just try to be a little bit more explicit. Saying no is still almost an impossibility for some cultures, but understanding that that may be necessary means that maybe you do that. It's not natural to you, but you do it because you know it's going to land well. It's going to send the message that you want to be received. So what you unlock when we kind of implement these things, creating this third culture, creating these norms together, is that we get better decisions, we get faster trust, we get sharper signals, we get smoother execution. Our teams work better. Most communication failures in international teams aren't really because we don't know how to communicate. It's because we're both coming from a different pole. So one of the things that we've done to help people to understand their own culture and how they communicate. One of these things that I'm conscious of, having worked with a lot of people, is that we often don't know how we operate. And the first step to understanding how other people operate is to understand how we operate. So there's a free assessment tool that you'll find on my website, which is the URL is there. This will look at your communication style, your behavioural preferences. It'll also ask you some questions about how safe you feel in the team that you're working in, to speak up, to be yourself, and that psychological safety. And also cultural intelligence, how well you adapt to different cultural scenarios. So there's a free tool there that will then give you a report that will look like this. It'll tell you your communication style. It will show you where you might be landing on these scales for communicating and feedback style. And it'll also tell you a little bit about your cultural intelligence and how you operate when you're under pressure. It's a basic tool. It's there to help us, give us some idea, to help us understand a little bit more about ourselves. And you can go and visit that anytime. I'll also put a link to this when we put the recording out. I'll put a link in the comments for that. Okay, and then you can connect with us. We are both on LinkedIn, so QR codes will take you to our LinkedIn profiles. I do a newsletter every week talking about cross-cultural communication management. You're welcome to connect with me, sign up to that. And obviously, Karina, do you want to tell people about what you're doing?
Of course, I'm also happy to connect if you're interested in cultures, but also any other area of communications. I run events, workshops, trainings in Berlin remotely, and I also travel. So if you're interested in collaborations, then just let me know.
Excellent. Really, really good. So, I don't know if anybody has any questions. We'd certainly like to hear from you if you have any questions about what we've talked about today.
I just want to say that this tool that Brandon developed is amazing. I'm very, very impressed. I already checked my communication style, and I must say, since I consider myself a reflected person and I like these topics, it really matched my idea of myself. So I was happy to see that. But there were also some revelations that I wasn't so clear about. So it gave me some additional clarity and it was super interesting to test it out. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely worth to try.
Mm-hmm.
There is a comment, Brandon, can you tell me more about your experiences? Which teams, oh, sorry, it moved. Which teams you have helped already and what stuck with you?
Yeah, so I've worked with quite a lot of people and teams. Most of the work that I do is outside of Barcelona. So I live in Barcelona, but I work with kind of international teams. One of the teams I'm working with at the moment is they have teams based in different parts of the world, and they are aware that they're not quite getting their communication in the right place. They're aware of it, but they can't put a name on it. And so helping one of the things we'll be doing with them is a full day's workshop, helping them to see to first of all understand that culture is in the room, and also to help them to give them skills to create that third culture that we've been talking about, to create these norms, and to help them to then start practicing that. So what I tend to do is I'll do a full diagnostic. So the tool that you have access to, this kind of free basic tool, is actually part of a much bigger tool, an AI powered tool that I use to do a diagnostic in teams. So we do a diagnostic at the very, very beginning. We start then to understand exactly where the friction points are, where the potential friction points are. That helps me to design a workshop, an intervention to teach and to help to bring people on a journey of learning how culture shows up, and then to really target those key friction points within within the teams. And then typically what I do after that is I would then follow up after a workshop with people, check in, make sure things are landing well, and also sometimes then spend the next 3 months kind of in an advisory role, checking in with people, making sure, doing some training around that. So yeah, I've helped a lot of people. I have a client who's worked in Japan, helping them to prepare to go out there and work in Japan and China, looking at those markets and how they can operate in those markets. Yeah, quite a lot of
It
things.
sounds super interesting, Brandon. Now that I use the word interesting, I'm very conscious of it.
I hope that was a positive, interesting.
It is positive, interesting.
That's great.
And I hope this tool will be available soon also for other facilitators to use. But you will tell us
Yeah,
later. I would love to include it also in my trainings.
sure.
From my side, I have worked a lot with international students. I love working with young professionals and already priming them for their career journey to yeah, give them also the human skills to succeed in their careers. So many times at international business schools where you can find that there's sometimes 20 different nationalities in the room, and that's very exciting. And another approach I've taken is having workshops with HR or learning and development professionals because they're the ones responsible in the company to share this knowledge. So I can work directly with the teams, but if the company has limited resources or wants to start at the core from where culture is shaped and designed, then I think HR and learning development are a really good place to start. And that's what I've been doing. And I had a really good experience in that area as well.
Excellent. Really, really good. I don't know if we have any more questions.
Just a comment. Oh, yes, one more question. Are there any sectors or kinds of teams that struggle with cultural misunderstandings more than others?
Mm, well, that's a really good question. I think the culture crosses all industries. However, I think that we are now and we have been for some time now, where uh, we have a lot of a startup culture. So there's this
Mm.
kind of startup culture and incubators and accelerators, this kind of thing. These have a tendency to draw people from lots of different cultures. And I'm just thinking of in Barcelona, um, and I know in all international cities, there are people from all sorts of cultures, and there's opportunities. They're coming together in teams. Often, a lot of this is tech driven industries, obviously, with AI now being talked about in just about every conversation that there is, no matter where you are. Um, this is obviously bringing a lot of people together from different cultures. So there's a lot of smaller teams that are getting together, they're creating something, they're trying to do online things that may be working virtually as well. I'm seeing a lot of this, and I'm seeing a lot of people not really truly understanding how do we work well together? How do we leverage our differences? How do we use those to our advantage? Because this is the key thing about cross-cultural working, is that we're not saying that everybody needs to work the same, but the problem is that if people in teams are from different cultures and that is left unmanaged, then there is statistics that prove that this reduces performance. That performance is reduced or it's not maximized. Whereas when people come together from different cultures and they are actively investing in knowledge, understanding how their cultures work together, how they can communicate, those teams, when psychological safety, which is the number one kind of process that determines success in a team. It's not the only one, but it's one of the biggest or the biggest. When those things are properly addressed, acknowledged, and worked upon, those diverse teams perform better. So I think that, yeah, I'm seeing obviously there's a lot going on in the tech industry at the moment, and I think there's a lot of teams getting together that need training, that they need to understand how to work together. I don't know, Karina, if you have anything to add on to that.
I agree. I think it's companies that are in the moment of change, that are transitioning, where also within the company culture, there's new setups, layoffs, hiring, transitions, because all of that affects culture. And I think something is really funny that now you also mentioned AI. So normally negotiations also over the globe, you had this physical contact. At least you could read the body language more or less. Even online it was already less, but you could still read some expressions.
Mm.
So now people use AI agents, right? And the AI agents do the work of negotiations. But it's really funny because if you're the one priming your AI agent from your perspective of what is a good negotiation, but the other person does the same, you think you're being efficient and smart, which you are. I don't want to say you're not, but there is maybe something you're missing. At least if you know that there's cultural differences, you can prime your AI agent to consider those when negotiating. Because then, if these agents talk to each other and the code is interpreted and just the yes is interpreted, it's even worse than interpreting it through a human. So,
Yeah.
AI is making things easier on the one hand, but more complicated on the other hand. And if you want to keep more control, you need to be more aware of all the areas that will affect this negotiation.
I think that's a really good point. You only have to look at the amount of opportunities there are for people to work to help AI understand cultural perspectives, because these AI models, it's so difficult to incorporate cultural perspectives into these AI models, and they don't really have them yet. These LLM models, they don't really have great understanding of how to operate within different cultures. There's so much work that's going on there, and I think it's a real danger that we again kind of delegate a lot of our work to AI, but it just doesn't have the sophistication, the nuance, to be able to work effectively across culture. Not yet. I'm sure that's going to get better. But yeah, that is a potential problem.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone who participated. And thank you so much for
Hmm.
Brandon for guiding this session.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really great. A real pleasure. Thank you so much for attending. Oh, let me go back there. So, this is who we are. We're going to be doing another webinar as well. Oh, did I? Yeah, we're going to be doing another webinar in June, on the 25th of June. So please do join us. We're going to be looking at feedback styles across cultures, which is really interesting, especially if you're in a managerial position and you're giving feedback. But just within teams generally, it's a very important topic. So thank you very much for being with us here today, and we hope that we see you next time. We'll also send out a recording of this session, and I'll also put a link to that free tool in the notes when we send out the recording.
Amazing. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye
Bye.
bye.